Champion Data's Daniel Hoyne is in the studio. Welcome.
Hello, Whitey. Hello, G.
What do you think about the event at the tribunal?
It's just a fascinating topic, isn't it? It just puts me to sleep, G. You know,
There's the Data King just showing you.
you know, the free kick and tribunal stuff, Gerard, and Whitey, that puts me to sleep straight away. So
You just bowled your half volley outside off stump and you just let it go.
No, it's just
big gap in the covers.
Just look at it and just tell me how many weeks he's got. We'll move on with
He's got
life.
3.
Let's get on with actually what's happening on field.
Okay, well, Charlie won't be happening on field for a period of time. But tell me, what do you value? What do you value in the game right now?
So we value a lot, but I just
you value ruckman.
So this is. I just wanted to have this discussion off the back of what happened at the selection table with the Ds on Wednesday, and then post a bit of discussion amongst the industry. For the few days afterwards around rucks and whether or not they're relevant and how do you value them and what have you. And it's a really interesting discussion. We talk a lot on this show that, 65, 70, 75% of the game is what happens post-clearance. Once the ball leaves that stoppage situation, what happens in that aspect of the game? So I had a bit of a look this week and I got our guys to have a bit of a breakdown of, the player ratings, which, we swear by, and the impact of performance at stoppage compared to away from stoppage.
Good stuff.
And you can have a look at the rucks, and we'll have a look at the rucks and the midfielders. This is what I just want to get into first and foremost. So the rucks and the midfielders and who's having impact where, and then what do you value from that? So if we start from the rucks.
Can you, just before you do, just for our listening audience, just tell us pre and post clearance, the differentiation between the two.
So pre-clearance is everything that happens at stoppage until the ball leaves that stoppage situation and then gets out into open play.
Right.
And
Does there have to be what's the delineation? If it's tap, take it, handball, goal, is that still pre-clearance or is that post-clearance?
No, once the first disposal generates that clearance, so that could be the first effective disposal in that chain.
Okay.
Everything post that is then
post-clearance.
So I think
straight into open play.
I think that's a really good question because a lot of people, this is a bit of an education around how you do what you do. So the handball out to the kicker from the stoppage. So the handball comes out and then the kick goes inside 50.
Yep.
Who gets the clearance?
Handballer.
Right.
The first effective disposal in that chain.
Right.
Always think of
is
that
the
with
kick
the clearance.
pre-clearance or is the kick post-clearance?
Post.
Rightio.
Everything post that clearance.
Yep.
So we just take it from ruckman. Right? So these are the 3 ruckmen that are having most impact at stoppage. Kieran Briggs, Mark Pittonet, and Darcy from Fremantle.
Sam Darcy,
So Kieran Briggs, 86% of his impact on matches is purely at stoppage. Once the ball leaves stoppage area, almost forget about Kieran.
Yep.
The impact that he's going to have on matches. Pittonet, a little bit the same. What he's doing at stoppage, he's having impact there. But once the ball leaves that situation, almost forget about the relevance that he plays in open field play. The ruckmen that are having most impact outside of stoppage, Max Gawn, Luke Jackson, Tim English. Give me those 3 over the rucks that are having the impact purely at stoppage. And this is where Max is of enormous value. Yes, his ruck work is good, but it's what Max does around the ground that sets him apart and has set him apart amongst the competition for best part of a decade. So Melbourne's situation on Wednesday night at match committee, when you're thinking about it, is how do we replace the post-clearance work with that? And then, as Kingy sort of, rightly said, they went with Petty to start with, and then it was actually Van Rooyen that actually was the one that had the greater impact post-clearance after quarter time to actually get that aspect of the game going. So if you think of what Kieran Briggs does, his impact on matches, 86% of it is at stoppage. Max has a 50-50 ratio. That is the perfect balance, a bit like Luke Jackson, as to why these guys are so good and can actually impact performance outside of pure ruck work. Then we just go into the midfielders. And this is where I find this really interesting in terms of, we've talked about on this show, and we mentioned it last week, taggers, whether or not they're back, whether or not they're there to be used as a pinch hit. If you're the opposition, I'd be looking at this sort of stuff in terms of who do you tag as a midfielder. So these are the midfielders that are having most impact at stoppage. Bont 1, Libba 2, Lachie Neale 3, Sarong 4, Isaac Heaney 5. the ones that are getting it done outside of stoppage, Josh Kelly is by far and away the most impactful midfielder post-stoppage in the competition. Heaney again, Bont again, Christian Petrarca, Chad Warner. So the midfielders that are getting it done both at stoppage and away from stoppage, Heaney, Bont, Cripps, Dacos. They're the four. The four that have just got that absolute perfect balance. But the ones that are getting it done purely on the outside, away from stoppage, Dawson, Chad Warner, Zach Merritt. So quite often those three have been tagged at times this year. If you're an opposition team, the tagger that you're using on these guys, don't think that you need to worry about what Dawson, Warner and Merritt are doing at stoppage. Send a person to them that is going to be able to track them in the open field transition game, a bit like what Neale Bullen did against Merritt on the weekend. Neale Bullen's ability to be able to run and get across the ground is his main asset. Went to Merritt, really good job that he actually implemented in that performance. But if you're looking at sort of a Lachie Neale or a Caleb Sarong, that's where I'm focusing in on. I'm going to Lachie at what he's doing at stoppage. I'm going to Sarong to watch what he does at stoppage. I'm going to Libba to watch what he does at stoppage. Once the ball leaves in that situation, free for all in a way. But that's where I'd be looking at that going, be careful in terms of the matchups that you're going to be sending to these blokes and make sure that you're not sending the wrong individual to sort of mitigate performance, that actually might not be there.
I thought Lachie Neale was really clever, and he's going to respond to those midfield tags. He pushed forward pretty hard on the weekend when he wasn't tagged. And then in the second, I think he had 20 up to halftime and about 9 after that. So they locked down on him with Lachie Murphy. And he didn't push as hard forward.
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago, was it?
Yep.
Right. That's right, it was. 2 weeks ago. And he kicked 3 goals in the first half, and the tag came on, which limited him significantly. So it's a very interesting concept you raise.
So I'd just be interested, just don't get the matchup wrong with what you think that you're trying to mitigate. Yeah, as I said, Cripps, Dacos, Bont, Heaney, get it done both ways, but they're very rare in terms of those midfielders that are in the competition.
I thought the selection, though, from Simon Goodwin, it needs even more, I think, acclaim, because he absolutely understood his man, and he went with Petty. Didn't quite work, but he always knew Van Ryan could come through, and they dominated, despite the fact that they didn't dominate the hitouts, which is once again, for the first time in about 2 or 3 years, and it's been regularly accosted. The hit-out stat has been shown for the fraud it is.
I didn't realise what the hit-out numbers were from the Friday night game until someone told me on Saturday morning. I couldn't tell you the last time I actually looked at the number.
Why is it so steeped in sort of spiritual
Because
love?
I think that there's been certain stats that have been taken forever and a day that everyone has had access to for 50 to 100 years. Disposals, kicks, marks, handballs, and probably hit-outs has been part of our sort of industry.
Yeah.
Even from a fantasy point of view, hit-outs is...
And they've always been easily accessible, so I think we've just been accustomed to that, but we're slowly changing.
I think there's also, Gerard, that situation of the romance of that perfect tap to the player on the fly that kicks inside 50 to the full forward, goes back and kicks the goal. Now, that happens once, know how often happens, once
Rare.
in a blue moon, but it is that fascination of how big an impact it can have.
I think
on
it
the
used
game.
to happen a fair bit more when there wasn't 25 guys around the ball, when there was just 4v4
Yes,
and then 4v4 again. I mean, I rove to losing rucks most of my career, and I rove to winning rucks in State of Origin. And, when you get the rare beast like Simon Madden, and there was a lot more of them in the 60s, 70s and 80s, but, Simon Madden stood out. Nick Nat stood out because when he was one of those guys who could raise his arm above the sort of everybody else. And when he did a hit out to advantage, it was a hit out that was so advantageous. They used to score exponentially more than most hit outs to advantage. And probably Max Gawn pre-knee injury, I think, was that. Would you agree, Hoyne? You're looking at me.
I don't think Max was at the same ruck work level as what Nick Nat was.
No.
And I think what he was able to do around the ground was probably at another level to what Nick Nat was.
Yeah. Nick Nat was big at getting his own clearances as well.
Phenomenal.
Never
ball.
understood by the wider public, I don't think.
Phenomenal. The definition of impact, Nick.
But when you think of Max Gawn, or what do I think of Max Gawn, is more the marking down the line, the marking opposition kicks on the wing, that sort of thing, more so than his hit-outs when I'm talking about the importance of him to Melbourne.
Yeah, no, totally.
Whereas
agree.
Grundy, because it was interesting having a conversation to Dan Hanbury about what Sydney values so much, and he talks about the scramble outside that initial ring. And then you tend to watch Sydney differently, and you see what Grundy does in the way that he will apply the tackle pressure. He will, sometimes get the kick off the ground and get it out of the mess. He becomes that extra midfielder at a clearance or at a stoppage situation. So every club values things differently, and a lot of it depends on the players, the personnel you've got. But that's the two ruckmen that I think of, Grundy and Gawn, and it's what they do to their team that makes them beneficial.
How have you rated Grundy's season?
Inconsistent. It's been good. It's been good at times, but he's had some games where he hasn't really needed to be, really dominant. I think people that are thinking about him in All-Australian situation, I think I wouldn't have him anywhere near that sort of category at the moment. But I think in terms of what he's done for Sydney, he's been a significant inclusion. I think he's had a good year, but he hasn't had the year that I think a lot of other people assume.
Before we move on, one final one. A couple of Hawks supporters desperate to know about Lloyd Meek and his improvement.
We've talked about him a lot on who the coaches have missed.
Yes.
He's ruck work, that tap in the last quarter.
Joe
The
Newcombe?
450. How good was that? That 450 ruck work. That's the one you're talking about, right? Very rare, but you notice it because they are so rare. But no, his battle with Luke Jackson on the weekend was, that was actually a fascinating battle across the 120 minutes.
How have you rated his season since he's been back?
No, really good. Yep. Yeah, really good. Significant inclusion and another smart list management decision by the Hawks.
Right, let's get stuck into your 7 main talking points.
Yeah, so we'll start with the Blues, given that they are probably almost the most topical team, along with probably a couple of others from the weekend. And we put this on the agenda last week around taggers. And, at times it does take the industry a fair bit of time to work out what opposition teams are doing when they do make change. And it takes them a bit of time to actually adjust to that and work out how you can actually combat that change that has been a positive sort of, move, for that team. So you go back probably 6-7 weeks ago is when Carlton made the move of Chincotta to be that start outside centre bounce and then go in and pick up the opposition's best midfielder. And it started with Zach Butters on a Friday night over in Adelaide, did a really good job, and it's been going really well for a 4 or 5 week period. But now the whole competition knows that it's coming. And for the first time last week against GWS, he got a little bit lost and it didn't work against Canelio when he tried to make that move, and that didn't work. And then on the weekend, I think that was the biggest one, for me over this 2-month period of him playing this role where he's gone to Bont in the exact same role, stayed outside the centre square. Bailey Dale is matched up against him. At the start of centre bounces, he goes to Bont. Bailey Dale plays free. Bailey Dale's first half is ridiculous. Absolutely, clearly the best player on the ground. And Bontempelli, who's getting tagged, Bontempelli was still the second best player on the ground. Right. Then Chincotta makes the move in the second half. Go off Bont, got to go to Bailey Dale because he's been dominant. Bailey Dale then has a pretty quiet second half, but the Bulldogs get the job done. I keep referencing the taggers, and I keep referencing the 2013 grand final, Ryan Crowley going to Sam Mitchell. Hawthorn and Australia knew that move was happening. They could orchestrate the stoppage in a way where they knew that matchup was coming to benefit them and to benefit the team. It just meant that Mitchell had to be the one that sacrificed his game. The whole footy world knows that Carlton have got issues in terms of how they're defending stoppage at the moment. And I just wonder whether or not the competition knows that Chincotta is coming to their best midfielder and they can orchestrate it in a way at stoppage to actually manipulate this matchup in a positive way that is getting significant scoreboard return going against Carlton and going against them the other way. So I just wonder whether or not Carlton are going to have to start to look at this over the next 6 weeks. We keep talking about the premiership runway. You've got 2 weeks to go to get to that situation. Whether or not they look at the Bailey Dale situation on the weekend, whether they look at the Tom Stewart move a couple of weeks ago and use Chincotta in this role to negate the opposition's best halfback flanker, as opposed to him going up to stoppage to negate the opposition's best midfielder. So I just there's a lot to this Carlton discussion. I just wonder whether or not that's something.
I like him on the best midfielder, but Bont is no ordinary best midfielder. Bont is such a beast that Chincotta couldn't handle him. So they got to work out who he can handle and who he can't, because he's done some terrific jobs.
Yeah, and I just think just with Carlton's overall defensive profile, so we just move away from that. So just this is why they're a hard one to work out. It is such a small margin with what Carlton are doing at the moment. A lot of their defensive stuff is coming out of centre bounce and is coming out of defensive 50 stoppages, which should be the 2 easiest fixes in the game to remedy if that is your issue. If they get those 2 areas back to AFL average, not even top 3, top 4, just AFL average, their defensive points against, their pure points against, comes back to 7th in the comp.
Okay.
So things are, it's not
that hard.
It's not disastrous. And it'd be more frustrating for Michael Voss and the coaches at the moment going, we've got the hardest part of the game from a defensive aspect locked away. We've just got to fix up what should be the easiest fix. So I just find it more of an interesting conversation around the Chincotta situation, and then how does that potentially fix what is happening with Carlton's weakness at the moment.
And the Blues have got North Melbourne and Port Adelaide the next 2 weeks, but both games actually at Marvel Stadium. So it'll be interesting on where you can score quite quickly, particularly from
North Melbourne have a
stoppage,
reasonable stoppage game.
They do.
Port Adelaide, that's probably at the moment how they can only beat you.
That's right.
Is at stoppage.
Big 2 weeks.
Interesting watch.
All right, we'll move on. The Brisbane Lions, now the Brisbane Lions mindless Charlie Cameron.
You're happy about that, aren't you?
Oh,
You don't look too happy.
Not
Tell us what you really think.
Well,
No, actually, don't tell us what you really think.
All
We won't be able to get through this.
Break.
So I just want to give Lachie Neale a bit of a shout out, and we mentioned about halfway through last year, and he ends up going on to win the Brownlow. But halfway through last year, his overall impact on the competition it really wasn't at the same levels that we've seen from Lachie over a number of years. His ability to be able to win the footy was still top 5, top 10 in the competition in terms of the impact that he was having in that phase of the game.
Yep.
But then the impact that he was having with his ball use, there was no power, there was no aggression, there was no potency in terms of what he was doing either through his handball game or his kicking game. And now over the last 6 weeks, that has completely changed, and it's now making him, arguably the best player, or if not one of the best players in the game over the last 6 weeks. So if I don't know if I would have put Lachie in this bracket in terms of impact through ball use.
Yep.
So this is over the last 6 weeks. So Chad Warner's having the most impact through ball use of any player in the comp. No real surprise. Hayden Young, his ball use and his delivery around the ground is superb. Then comes Lachie, followed by Zach Butters, who we all appreciate and can understand, and Isaac Rankin, who we all appreciate and understand his creativity. So for Lachie to sit in there at the moment, that's him, a 2-time Brownlow medalist, elevating his impact across the competition. And in terms of field kicking, I think we can all look at it and go, yeah, Errol Goulden, probably the best, or most impactful field kick in the competition. Hayden Young again. Dane Zorko, we laud for his creativity. In comes Lachie with his field kicking as well. So
this is a big change from this time last year or the year before when you said he was no good with the football.
It's a massive change. So he's not having impact on the competition through his handball game.
Yeah.
He's having impact on the competition through what he's doing with his kicking game, which I don't know if you two have I haven't really sort of assigned that with Lachie across his career. I've assigned him more through his ball winning and then his ability to be able to create through his handball stuff.
But it's clearly after you clipped him 12 months ago, he's clearly taken that on board.
He's got posters of Hoyne on his bedroom wall.
And last year, he only hit the scoreboard twice in 2 games last year. Now he's charging forward, like you said, being able to sort of impact the game.
So in simple terms, Hoyne, is it as simple as he's kicking the ball more than he has previously? So his kick to handball ratio is different, or it's just the quality?
It's what
of
he's doing with it. what he's doing. I'm watching him right now, and what he's doing over the last couple of weeks. When he gets the ball in hand, I don't know if I've said this about like you're actually excited in terms of what's actually going to happen. There's some beautiful his delivery from his centre clearance work going that kick he had inside 50 against Adelaide 2 weeks ago, charging out of the centre bounce, kicked it across his body, hipwood on a lead mark. That's pure midfield delivery.
Yep.
So I just. To think that this guy is doing what he's doing now off the back of what he did in last year's final series through, one way or another, where he really didn't impact performance in either of the 3 finals and they fell 4 points short of winning a flag. It's a huge tick and a real boost for Brisbane.
Big tick for Lachie. Neale. Thought you were going to use the word craft there for a second, Hoyne. So disappointed you're not up with the current lingo, but we'll get that through to you at some
That's not me, Joe.
Western Bulldogs before guess who?
Yeah, so just quickly on the Dogs, I think as an industry, we've talked about that they probably rely on their top end talent more than any other team. In the top 12 to 13 of the competition. Bont number 2, Dale number 6, Richards 31 and Treloar 45. Their next best player is outside the top 120. Big gap. And I think that's why you're going to see inconsistencies in performance. We talk about the turnover game being the sustainable game. If that's in if that's in good shape, that sort of really does, can hide away the lack of talent because the system's so strong. The clearance game is more the talent side of things. Their turnover game is 13th in the comp. Their clearance game is 3rd. So they're going to have games like they did against Port Adelaide, and they're going to have games like they did against Carlton and like they did against Sydney and like they did against Collingwood and a few other teams, because the inconsistencies are going to be there off the back of relying on talent more so than the system component. It's going to make them a really dangerous team over the next 6 weeks. But I don't, unless that profile changes, I don't think as an industry you're looking at the Dogs and expecting great consistency over the next 6 weeks. That might change if some of these role players.
Does it have to change for them to make the 8, as all the boys on Crack predicted?
I think it has to change. Yeah, I think it has to change because they've got I don't really look at the draw too much, so I'll actually mitigate that. It's more how you play, not who you're playing. The how makes them dangerous, but it's not going to make them sort of a real threat. I can hear the music, Hoyne.
What about guess who?
So the last 6 weeks, this player is the 5th best player in the competition. He plays for a current top 4 team. He's the 5th best player in the competition. He plays for either Sydney, Carlton, Brisbane, or Geelong.
I reckon I've got a name
last
straight away.
6 weeks.
Our guess who? Just go through the category again, and then we'll give our nominations, and then we'll throw a few texts out there.
Last 6 weeks, this guy is the 5th best player in the competition, and he plays for a current top 4 team. So he either plays for Sydney, Carlton, Brisbane, or Geelong.
Well, I'm going to go for one of 2 Brisbane Lions supporters. And Lions supporters, and if you've just jumped in the car, your man Charlie Cameron has been suspended for 3 weeks. We've picked ourselves up off the floor, and we're going to just process that and assume that they're going to appeal. But I'm going for Dane Zorko or the Big O, but I'm going to stick with the Big O.
I'm going to go with Patrick Dangerfield and the impact that he's had on Geelong, particularly in centre bounce work. That's my pick.
No, I like the nominations, but neither of you are correct, and neither of you have got the team correct. This player, this is scary for the for the rest of the competition. He's coming from the best team in the competition, and his name is Tom Papley.
Right.
So just when you thought Sydney are just about complete, this guy has just taken his game to another level over the last 6 weeks.
What elements of his game has jumped
absolutely
up?
Flying. So the last 6 weeks, only Errol Goulden has been involved in more scores across the competition than what this guy has. His ability to win contests inside the forward 50 is top 10 in the competition, and he's kicked 14 goals across his last 5 matches as well. So,
well, congratulations to 161 who correctly identified.
We'd have had 100 nominations and we had one correct answer.
Thomas Papley.
Well done. Well done. So, so that's going to be an interesting matchup for Brisbane ahead of this weekend. So this guy, I think he had a bit of a slowish sort of start to the year. Didn't really need to do much off the back of what Heaney and Warner and Goulden and these guys were doing. But
they were hogging it.
But now what he's doing over the last 6 weeks is now posing a headache to the opposition. So well done to Tom. I just want to put this on the agenda with the Swans. and it's, might be a bit harsh, but it might not be. But when you're as good as what you are, you're trying to dive into any possible little chink in what they're doing at the moment. The reality is the profile is as close to perfection as you've seen by any team at this stage of the year. But over the last 6 weeks, they're giving you a look with how they're exiting the footy out of their back half. So over the last 6 weeks, they're turning the footy over in their back half, the 5th most of any team in the competition, and they've given up the 4th most points of any team in the competition.
What are teams doing that's making them give it up? Are they pressing harder?
Well,
Is it more pressure?
Well, I think everyone knows the way that Sydney want to move the footy, and it's an aggressive change of angles, try and take corridor, and really get those elite ball users behind the footy to really excel through their creativity. But the absolute pure giveaway, so that's just giving the ball straight back to the opposition, landing it blatantly on their chest.
Yes.
In the back half. Ollie Florent has done that the second most of any player in the comp over the last 6 weeks. And a huge surprise here, Errol Goulden has done it the 5th most of any player in the competition over the last 6 weeks.
Errol?
Yeah, I was going to say.
And in terms of a scoreboard return, Nick Blakey has given up the second most points of any player from his back half turnovers in the comp. The fascination with this, last 6 weeks, Brisbane, AFL number 1 at punishing those turnovers. In the competition.
Who are Brisbane playing on the weekend, Hoyne?
They're playing the Swans. And
they're playing without Charlie Cameron, Gerard.
I just said
at this stage.
I just said to you two in the ad, bro, I actually can't remember a better 110 Sunday game for a best part of a decade. It's usually just locked away for it. Yeah, so just an interesting watch. They can tidy it up, but this is where, as I keep saying, the rest of the competition is going to work on the Swans, knowing that you have to get through them to win it.
Is it the price you pay, though, to move the ball as quickly as they did? You have to risk the turnover.
Well, this wasn't happening in the first 3 months of the year as well. So
I reckon there's an element of boredom in
boredom.
Yep, in the way that they almost challenge themselves at times to go the crazy
that sounds
kick
like Hollywood to me.
Well, okay, Hollywood, yeah. I feel at times, and I've watched them closely. I've go to Sydney a lot to watch them play. Even when they get behind in games, that's all right. We'll be right. And then they just switch gears, and then all of a sudden it changes a bit. And I think some of the names you're mentioning, they are a bit Hollywood, which we like, but that's what they kind of do. They like the challenging kick rather than
and they've got the skills to pull it off. Just right at the moment, they are giving you a look in that aspect of the game. So just keep an eye on that for Sunday.
Yep. What do we got next?
The Cats.
Yeah. So I just wanted. So there's been a lot of talk around the obvious magnet changes that Geelong have made, and I'm not too sure what you guys think. They look like a totally different team.
Totally.
They look like a team that is back in contention and playing some seriously good footy. The other aspect that has changed, and people don't shut down just based off what's happened on Friday night. We don't do that. We talk about the trends that are happening with them. For the first 14, 15 weeks of the year, in terms of how they were trying to move it and how they were actually trying to use the footy, life was too hard. They were almost making things too difficult for what they were trying to do. No team in the competition was trying to pull off harder kicks than what they were, and by a mile in terms of the degree of difficulty that they were trying to pull off. As a result, they have to go long down the line and kick to contest more than any other team in the competition, and as a result, they're taking the fewest uncontested marks of any team in the competition. Now, since the bye, where you get to really properly review your program, what's happening, let's try and make some adjustments. Yes, the magnets have changed, but now in terms of the degree of difficulty of kicks that they're trying to pull off, they're making life far easier for themselves in terms of not pulling off harder kicks and pulling off the 9th easiest kicks.
Are they going shorter in their kicks?
They're long down the line. They've gone from being long down the line more than anyone else in the competition to now doing it the 4th least in the competition. They've gone from taking the fewest uncontested marks to the 3rd most uncontested marks, and it's not just off the Collingwood game. It's been 3 games in a row. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and there's no team that's trying to switch the ball more than what Geelong have over the last month. So they've reverted away from being, making life really challenging for themselves to now actually giving themselves a chance. And you were there Friday night, when they were playing that game, they looked so threatening. The game looked in complete control. And we don't we don't really do this a lot, but I just want to get ahead of the situation at the moment until, potentially the rest of the industry comes on board, because over this 3-week period, what they're doing at the moment in terms of when they win the footy, they're the 4th best team in the competition at punishing you.
Mm.
And when they give you the footy or when you start with the ball, there's no harder team in the competition to punish against. So they've got the magnet changes in place. They've got the method changes in place. They look like a totally different footy team. And so often we talk about, and you look back at history, you look at what Melbourne did in 21, and I'm not saying that they're going to win a flag or anything, but teams get hot late. If this sticks for another 2 or 3 weeks, I can guarantee what the industry-wide conversation will be about them. So I just wanted to get ahead of time, because potentially
Sounds
it could
like
happen.
a premiership predictor. Spot.
Potentially, if this sticks over another 2 or 3 weeks, as I said, the topic around this team will completely change.
Will they jump into the top right-hand corner?
They might get there by round 24. Might. They're leaving themselves a fair bit of work to do, but I just want to put it on the agenda in terms of, outside of the magnets, what they're doing from a method situation.
So how much of it do you think he's got to do with Patrick Dangerfield and his centre bounce work that he's doing, or is this more just a method thing?
Oh, I think it's more than danger. I think clearly the impact of Dangerfield is there, and their centre bounce work, especially early on, was so powerful, and he was really important to it. But you want to be more than just that one individual.
Yeah.
Clearly he helps, but right now they are more than just that one individual.